We have seen that the price of many things have risen substantially with time, things like gas, housing, bananas. You may have heard your family say something like, I bought this house for $3,000 when I was young, or when I was younger, I made only $2 an hour. So most other prices and wages have risen too, right? Gas used to be 50 cents, now it's $3.50. What is this phenomenon called? Well, it is called inflation. It's this idea that the cost of goods in general are going up. Some things go down, but for the majority of things, the price of goods is going up. But also wages have gone up as well. Housing has gone up as well. Changes in price are not very useful unless we compare them to the overall rate of inflation, which is measured by the Consumer Price Index. So what do I mean by this statement? I mean basically, if you said, hey, in 1920, my grandmother bought this house for $3,000. Now it's worth $1 million. You want to think, well, is that increasing at the same rate as maybe the cost of bananas have gone up and the price of bread? And so that's what I mean by comparing them to the overall rate of inflation, which talks about the rate at which all things are going up. So let's talk a little bit about the Consumer Price Index. First of all, who calculates it? It is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yes, that is a job, and yes, you could get it in your future if you're interested in this. What is the Consumer Price Index? The Consumer Price Index, which we call the CPI, is based on an average of prices for a sample of more than 60,000 goods, services, and housing costs. It's computed and reported monthly. What you can do is think about it as getting a bucket of general goods. You've got tomatoes, you've got flour, milk, cereal. You can think of it as housing, how much babysitting costs, etc. So they collect that data for 60,000 goods and they average that cost and they compute that and they report that monthly. And that gives you a general idea of how prices are increasing or decreasing. So it's calculated just like we calculated other index values, and we'll cover that at some point. But currently the reference value for the CPI is an average of prices during 1982 to 1984. Like I said, I've not talked about index values, but I certainly will in the future, so don't worry too much about this. All right, what type of goods and services are included in the Consumer Price Index? All right, well, let's take a look. We can see that we're looking at food and beverages like breakfast cereal, milk, coffee, etc. They're looking at the housing costs like rent, bedroom furniture costs. They're looking at how much men's shirts cost, women's dresses, jewelry, etc. Looking at transportation, medical care, recreation, how much college tuition costs, how much tobacco and smoking costs, and haircuts, etc. So they're looking at tons and tons of things, 200 categories, 60,000 objects, getting an average of their price, and that helps us calculate the Consumer Price Index. So here it is, and I don't want you to think too much about, hey, how these numbers come about, right? I want you to think more about what does a small number mean and what does a big number mean. So a small number, for example, if you look at 56.9 in 1976 and you look in 2008 to 15.3, this is implying that the cost of goods in 2008 is much higher than in 1976 because the Consumer Price Index is higher. It's also implying that there was a general drop at some point. So for example, let's see if we can find one. Where did it drop at all? I'm actually mistaken. There's not a single year here where the inflation rate went down. There are some years where the inflation rate was not as high as others. So for example, if you look at 1998 to 1999, there was only a 3-point jump. So the cost of goods didn't go up that much. versus something like, let's see what I can find here. From 1979 to 1980, there was a huge jump. And so prices went up substantially, and hopefully wages went up that same rate as well. So don't think too much about how we calculated these numbers. Think more about what a small number and a big number implies. The chart on the previous page is actually the CPI-U, which is based off of the purchasing habits of urban dwellers. The CPI-W is based on the purchasing habits of only wage earners. But for the most part, we deal with the CPI-U. It's just kind of a fun fact, not really something you need to know, but interesting. There are some issues with the CPI. So for example, if you're going to take the cost of a phone in 1990 and you compare it with the phone in 2020, well, phones have gotten a lot nicer and there's more technology involved, and that's why the price of phones have gone up substantially, not necessarily because of inflation, although that's a piece of it. It also doesn't account for situation bias, right? If you think about if the price of bananas goes up, you're going to buy more apples, and then that's going to drive the price of bananas down because no one's buying bananas. And so there are definitely some issues with calculating this. And you might say, who cares? No big deal. Actually, it's a huge deal because oftentimes people's salaries increase with the same rate of inflation. So your boss will say, okay, you get a 2% raise this year because inflation went up 2%. Well, what if the CPI is calculated wrong? Well, then the inflation rate is calculated wrong, and then your wage is not going up enough, or maybe it's going up too much. So those are some of the issues with the CPI, and that affects the rate of inflation. All right, let's go ahead and let's get down a definition, and this is also going to be a formula. So the rate of inflation from one year to the next is usually defined as the relative change, percent increase in the consumer price index. In other words, we're just using new minus old over old, but we're using the CPI values. Let's go ahead and let's do an example. Make sure you pause this video and get that formula and that definition down. All right, find the inflation rate from 1980 to 1981. Okay, where's my 1980? It's right here. Where's my 1981? It's right here. So this is my new, this is my old. So I'm going to do 90.9 minus 82.4 divided by 82.4, then multiply that by 100. All right, just remember, if you're going to do this in your calculator, do this first, press enter, divide by 82.4, then multiply by 100, and I get 10.3%. So your inflation rate from 1980 to 1981 is 10.3%, meaning in general, those 60,000 goods, college tuition, bananas, babysitting costs, shirts, all of those items went up 10.3% in cost from 1980 to 1981. And you would hope that people's wages also went up 10.3% as well. So calculating inflation rate is the same thing as doing new minus old over old, and that's done with the consumer price index. All right. So using the table on the right, can you find a time when the inflation rate went up more than this? Let's see. Actually, I see right here, if we were to calculate 1979 to 1980, that rate would be higher. And you can go ahead and calculate it if you want. I'm trying to find another time on here. This one's close, but I don't think so. But I would definitely say 1979 to 1980. Find the inflation rate from 2007 to 2008. How does it compare to the inflation rate in the late 70s? All right, so 2007 to 2008 is going to be right here. So that'd be a new, that'll be an old. So that's 215.3 minus 207.3 divided by 207.3 times 100. Okay, when I do this in my calculator, I get 3.859, or I'll say 3.86%. And so my inflation rate from 2007 to 2008 was 3.86%. How does it compare to the inflation rate in the 1970s, or the late 1970s? Well, we just did that on the last page, right? We just found that the inflation rate from 1980 to 1981 was 10.3%. That's kind of the late 70s, right? Oops, wrong direction. And so we could say that, how does it compare to the inflation rate in the late 70s? It is a lot lower. Right here, we're going smaller jumps. And here you can see we're going from 65 to 7 to 60 to 65. So you're welcome to do new minus old over old with those and find an actual value. But I will tell you that this percentage is a lot lower. This inflation rate in 2007 to 2008 is a lot lower than in the late 70s. Meaning the price of goods went up a lot more in the late 70s than they did from 2007 to 2008. All right, if your salary was $20K in 1976, how much should it be in 2008 to keep up with the cost of living? Well, let's figure out how much the price of goods have gone up from 1976 to 2008. So we're looking at this, and we're looking at that. So that's going to be my new and my old. So that's going to be 215.3 minus 56.9 over 56.9 times 100. And that's going to be 278.4%. Meaning that my $20,000 in 1976 should also go up 278.4%. So just a reminder, old plus old percent equals new. So my 20,000 wants to go up 278.84%. Well, how do I write that as a decimal? Well, that's going to be bringing my decimal over 2 times to the left. So this is going to be multiplied by 2.784. And if you don't believe me, to convert that into a percent, you'd bring your decimal over twice, right? All right, so let me do that calculation. Just doing that, I get $75,680. So if your family says to you, back when I was your age, I made only $20,000 a year, you would say, well, that's the same thing as someone making $75,000 now, which is quite a bit of money. All right, Connor's salary, oops, sorry about that, Connor. I know you're an E. Connor's salary went from $80,000 in 1988 to $140,000 in 2008. Did his salary outpace inflation? All right, well, let's see. Let's go ahead and find how much his salary went up. Well, that's going to be 140 minus 80. And you could put the zeros if you want, but you know it's going to be the same thing. And I get, 1 second here, I get 75% increase. So now the question is, did his salary outpace inflation? Well, let's go ahead and find the inflation rate from 1988 to 2008. So 1988 is here. So we're going to do our new minus old over olds. So that's going to be this formula right here, new minus old over old. Don't forget to multiply by 100, and I get 82%. So the inflation rate, we'll call that IR, the inflation rate is 82%, but Connor's salary, I'll call that CS, but Connor's salary went up 75%. So I'm just going to go 82% divided by 75%, and I get that the inflation rate was 1.09 times Connor's salary. Or you can do the division in the other direction. If I go 75 divided by 82, I get that Connor's salary is 0.914 times the inflation rate. In other words, Connor kind of got screwed over a little bit here. His salary did not go up as much as inflation. So even though the costs of goods are going up, his salary did not match that. So that's not great. So he did not outpace. Outpace means to go beyond or above. All right, thanks for watching, everyone. That is rate of inflation. And of course, we talked about the CPI as well. Have a great day.